Yeah, good evening, everyone. So, just see the first question for today. Analyze the different approaches to the disaster management with regard to 1999 Orissa Supercyclone and 2013 Phyllin Cyclone. Okay. Basically, you have to mention about the disaster management pertaining to the Orissa cyclone and also with regard to this Phyllin cyclone. These are the two important things. Try out this once. Try this out. Disaster management with regard to the 1999 Supercyclone, Orissa Supercyclone and Phyllin cyclone. Give me the framework. Yes. Anyone else? Yeah. Then what else? Okay. Basically, the question is yes. So cyclone. Basically, you can start the introduction with basic definition of cyclone. Okay. Yeah. So here the examiner is asking you the difference in approach with regard to the disaster management, okay, of 1999 Orissa Supercyclone and 2013 Phyllin cyclone. Okay, so basically you need to give the differences in approach with regard to the 1999 and 2013. Okay, so what is the main aspect of 1999? We know how devastating was 1999 Orissa Supercyclone because at that time there were many lacunae in approaching the disasters like cyclones. Okay, so the basic means of communication was only television. Even in the television there were only 1 or 2 channels and the signal receiving of the television was very poor. So the advanced action or the advanced information which can be given to the people was the time which can be given for the people for advanced action was very less. Second is the preparedness for the disaster as far as the local administration or the central agencies was not up to the mark. And then the reaction time was quite late and hence there was lot of loss in lives as well as the property. Okay, and then the landmark event occurred in 2005 with regard to the Disaster Management Act. So this particular act revolutionized the way disasters have been handled in India. What happened in 2013 Phyllin cyclone? It has become a case study as to how Orissa has handled this particular super cyclone when compared to the 1999 cyclone. Here they have used lot of technology. They have used lot of technology. Okay, and they have used lot of advancement. They have given intimation in advance to the people. They have moved people to the safer places, to the uplying areas. Technology was used extensively in communication. Okay, and basically the highlight of 2013 approach was human loss was very less. The human loss was very less, and as a result, this particular handling of this 2013 cyclone became a kind of case study. And from there till today, Orissa is leading in various type of uh, handling of disasters, especially cyclones. Okay, Orissa is now one of the important places where the disaster management has become very efficient with regard to the handling of cyclones, and hence the main difference between 1999 and 2013 is the evolution of Disaster Management Act 2005, NDRF personnel, specific trained forces to attend disasters like cyclone, pre-plannedness, before information. So, and then instead of reactive, today now we are speaking of the proactive approach. I'm writing something on the screen. Is it visible to you all?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So basically, instead of a reactive approach, today we are taking a very proactive approach. Okay, and then that can be your way forward. And hence, you can conclude by saying all these points with regard to the first question. Any doubts here?
No, sir.
Anyone else? Who has written answers? Santa Prasad. The introduction is slightly longer, Rajni. You can arrive at the core point from here. Okay, this is the core point. Okay. Yes, this is important. Communication was only through this. Preparedness was less. Yes, lot of damage done. Approach for 2013. Yes, mock drills. Good points. Good points, Rajni. Okay, and then this map is also good. You should have given a proper conclusion by linking that, how the technology and preparedness and the Sendai framework also you can write in your, basically you can write about Sendai framework, technology, okay, and then preparedness, NDRF. So all these are points which have improved over 1999. Okay, so then you can conclude your answer by mentioning these points. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, see the second question for the day. Illustrate the role of crisis mapping in disaster management. So the two key terms, crisis mapping and disaster management. Try this.
So please clarify the doubt which I mentioned in the message.
1 minute. Santa. Main difference between asking to write the differences in approach and analyze the differences in approach. So they are trying to ask you analyze. So analyze means you have to see what is difference. You have to mention the differences and analyze why there is the difference. Okay. If you have to mention the differences in approach. If you have to analyze why there are differences. Obviously, why there are differences, because after 2005 landmark event of NDMA and the evolution of NDRF and the evolution of technology, now the approach itself is different. And then we are saying that previously it was a reactive approach and today we are having a proactive approach. Clear? Prasad? Okay, right. Good. Yeah, see the next question. Illustrate the role of crisis mapping in disaster management. So, what is the question is about? Okay, the question is about the role of crisis mapping in disaster management. What is basically crisis mapping? What do you mean? If you understand this term, the entire question is very easy. What is crisis mapping? What is crisis mapping? Anyone? What do you understand by crisis mapping? Yes, what do you mean by crisis mapping? No one knows what is crisis mapping?
Sir, mapping of the events through data.
What do you mean by crisis? Especially tell me what do you mean by crisis? First,
So
let's
whatever the
break the
disaster,
word.
sir. Yeah, sir.
Huh?
It's a disaster, any disaster.
Any untoward incident
Yes, sir.
or
Unprecedented
any
incident.
sudden disaster puts us into crisis. Now tell me what is crisis mapping. So trying to understand such disasters beforehand. Trying to understand such disasters beforehand is basically crisis mapping. Is it clear? Trying to know such events or trying to map such events which will be possibly shaking us, and it will help us in tackling this situation is called crisis mapping. Yes or no? Clear? Clear about crisis mapping?
So when we Google it, we found some other definition for this crisis mapping. So crisis mapping regards to the live mapping of people stuck in locations and the medical aids, the locations, and intact buildings location and intact roads locations, something like that. So
Sorry,
and
sorry.
they gave example for Uttarakhand 2013 floods crisis mapping. And Haiti earthquake crisis mapping also they gave examples. So slightly
Yeah,
different.
what did they give?
Locations of victims where they stuck and which roads are blocked and which road is available for them, and
Yeah.
medical aids locations.
Okay, that is they are giving examples of crisis mapping. Okay, those are examples of crisis mapping. What do you mean by crisis mapping is what we are trying to understand. What is crisis? An untoward incident or a sudden incident. Whatever you are referring, the Uttarakhand floods or anything are untowards and sudden incidents, right? So how do we understand them, or how do we able to get information about them? is the crisis mapping. That is the basic definition. How you will do crisis mapping is again a very big issue. It involves a lot of tools, it involves a lot of real-time data, it involves GIS systems, it involves technology, it involves drones, it involves supercomputing. All these are the tools for doing the crisis mapping. But what is crisis mapping is the basic question. Basically, it is the understanding of the issue or the understanding of the disaster to be able to tackle that particular disaster. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
So in this context, basically crisis mapping is trying to understand the disaster in such a way that we can tackle that particular disaster. That is crisis mapping. So now, how do we do that crisis mapping? Is by usage of technology. So first you start this question by defining what is crisis mapping, and then say, how do we do crisis mapping? How means usage of technology and usage of real-time data. And if there are any seismic activities, what is the seismic records? And then if there are any prone areas or ecologically sensitive areas, what is the data? Okay. And then what are the various locations or what are the zonations which are prone to disasters? These are the things which you use to do the crisis mapping. So how is over? Now, what is the use of crisis mapping in managing the disaster? This is the core element of the question. What do you do after mapping the crisis? For example, when there is a cyclone, and when you know that the cyclone is having a particular direction like this, you will try to evacuate the people in this area. So when you are mapping a crisis or when you're mapping a disaster, what is the usage of mapping such a disaster during disaster management is, again, you can write the approach of PMRR. If you know the disaster is coming beforehand, you can try to prevent the damage or mitigate the extent of damage to great extent. Then, if the crisis is mapped with regard to the disaster, you can have real-time data about how that particular disaster is moving or going to impact, and try to plan your disaster management accordingly and alert the local administration. And you can alert the local areas through SMS or telecommunication or the GIS information systems so that they are ready to tackle the crisis. And crisis mapping will also help your NDRF people, NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, to go and have targeted interventions. Like if you know that one particular village is going to be devastated by the flood or cyclone, you will target that village. So means focused way you will go and approach the problem when compared to random way. So that is the main advantage of crisis mapping. And with the focused approach, the efficiency of the management forces, especially the NDRF forces, will be very high. And the local administration also will be alert and they are ready to cooperate with the central forces. Hence, the harmony between various forces will increase by having proper crisis mapping. Okay, so all these are the advantages of the crisis mapping. You can say in the conclusion by saying that the monitoring and the mapping of the disaster will help a lot in preventing the damage done during the course of disaster. Hence, crisis mapping will dynamically help the forces to map the disaster and take focused approach instead of the roundabout approach, thereby improving the efficiency and also containing the damage done by the disaster. Clear? Who has written this answer? Unmute yourself and tell me. Rajani is over. Who else has written? Whose answers are not discussed in the last class? Prasad, you have written?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good definition. Yes. So basically, you have given different stages of how the crisis can be mapped. Good. You have given a case study. Okay, good. So the main drawback is the communication system, which gets impacted during disasters. Yes, power sources. Maybe you can raise usage of drones. Prasad? Drones.
Okay, sir.
Drones are one good technology which we can write many places, especially with regard to disaster, because in disasters, many human personnel may not reach that area, but they can send the drones and try to get the analysis of those areas. Okay.
Yes, sir.
After solutions, maybe you can mention conclusion and sum it up, sum the discussion. Okay. As to what we have said. Clear?
Clear.
Yeah. See the last question of the day. India's commitment to disaster risk reduction, that is DRR, is evident from the fact that it became one of the first countries to align its NDMP, that is National Disaster Management Plan, with the Sendai framework. Okay. What are the salient features of India's first NDMP? How can this plan help in effective disaster management? So various questions are there, but the basic questions are this: 1 and 2. These are the core questions. Remaining part of the question can be used in your introduction slightly. So just try for it. So basically, Prasad, the way forward or conclusion, if you are giving solutions in your way forward, then you can give conclusion as a separate side heading. Okay, but if you are not giving any solutions, okay, then your conclusion can also have solutions and then conclude. Okay. Generally, if it's a bigger answer, try to give both the dimensions. And if the answer is asking for some problem, try to give solutions in your way forward and then conclude. If the question is generic, like, critically examined, so you're already giving positive and negative, so directly you can write conclusion, okay, or way forward. Okay, it's not a generic thing like, this is a hard and fast rule. It depends on case to case. Clear? Okay, fine. See the last question. India's commitment to the disaster risk reduction is evident from the fact that it became one of the first countries to align with NDMP, align its NDMP with Sendai framework. So basically, they're asking you what are the salient features of the NDMP with regard to the Sendai framework. So you have to mention the salient features of NDMP and then try to connect them with the Sendai framework, because India signed Sendai framework, which is applicable up to 2030. So what are the features of NDMP which are in line with the Sendai framework that you have to mention? And how can this plan help in effective disaster management? So basically, by listing out the salient features of NDMP with regard to the Sendai framework, next side heading will be how this particular adoption of NDMP in line with the Sendai framework will help in effective disaster management. So of course, the second part is again the standard part which we know and have written now n number of times. Even in your dreams, you should be able to write this particular approach, especially the PMRR approach. So in the second part of the question, you will again come back to this PMRR approach, that is prevention, mitigation, response and recovery, how that has helped in successful handling of many disasters post adoption of NDMP in line with Sendai framework. So the first part of the question you can introduce by saying how we are prone to disasters and how we have come up with many policies like 2005 NDMA, etc. And then straight away come to the part that after signing of Sendai framework, we have looked for more proactive approach and more holistic approach, and hence try to integrate our NDMP in line with the signed Sendai framework. Then come to the salient features. What are the salient features? Basically, now it has become a very proactive approach. Okay. And then it is the NDMP is now focusing on more on prevention and mitigation, and it is also focusing on empowering the local administration, and then it's now targeting the bottom top approach. It is targeting the bottom top approach, and then more synergy between various coordination agencies. There is now more synergy between various coordination agencies. There is clear distinction between non-structural and structural parts. Non-structural and structural aspects of the disaster, they are segregated and then planned. Okay. And then the plan is now there is a clear-cut plan for each and every disaster, and it is documented and available with the local civil administration. Okay. And then the agencies are having certain protocol. Now there is a protocol for each and every disaster which they have documented, and now there is a checklist for particular disaster. For example, if the cyclone or the flood is striking a particular region, so the district collector has to do 1, 2, 3, 4. So no matter who is the district collector, they are supposed to follow this protocol or checklist. So this is the new implementation of the disaster NDMP. So these are the important points, okay, which are now part of the NDMP. And one more thing is the improvement of the capability to fight the disaster. Capability has increased to fight the disaster. Now the forces are more trained. Okay. All these are the important aspects of the NDMP with regard to the integration of Sendai framework. Now, how this will help in effective disaster management is the question. Now, what is the, again, try to give the advantages of these points with regard to integration of NDMP with Sendai framework. Now we are able to fight the disasters more proactively with a positive mindset of PMRR approach. We are trying to make zonation of vulnerable areas, try to plan development in those areas. And again, you can use the 22nd question in 23rd. Now we are able to use the crisis mapping in the disaster management, okay, that you can write. And then we are now trying to provide a lot of technological inputs to the disaster prone areas, and thereby trying to help the fighting of disasters. And the phases of various disasters can now be tackled individually than holistically. We can have more targeted approach. Okay. And then the recovery from the disasters is now significantly low. Recovery time. Previously, if the disaster struck any area, the recovery time was in months or sometimes years. But today, within days, we are able to recover from the disaster and try to address the disaster immediately. Okay, and also we are able to document the responses for the disasters, which are helping us in fighting the future disasters. So simply you can write a way forward or conclusion saying that by above inputs, we are now in a much better position to fight disasters. But the way forward is the formation of separate ministry for handling the disasters. And because a lot of time is wasted in coordinating between various agencies, the moment we are able to bring all these various forces onto one ministry, the coordination can be much better, and the response towards the disaster will be much faster and much systematic in approach. Is it clear? Who has written this answer? Vasavi, you have written? Good points, Vasavi. Good. Here you can again write the inclusion of technology, common ministry. All these you can include. Okay, Vasavi? Good points. You have made a lot of good points. Just try to include few more points as we have discussed. Okay, is it clear? Any doubts with regard to today's discussion? Any doubts regarding today's discussion? Or any doubts regarding other discussions in general?
So preparedness step where we can include in PMRR, sir?
Preparedness for a disaster, for example, when you do a zonation mapping, for example, if the earthquake prone area is mapped beforehand, you can be prepared for knowing the disaster there, right? You can be prepared that this area is prone to disaster. For example, if you know that a particular area is prone for floods, what is the preparedness you will do? First thing is you'll stop construction there. And if there are already some constructions, if they are illegal, you'll remove. Or you will ensure that at least when there is a warning of flood, those areas which are prone to the flooding are first evacuated. That is the preparedness. Clear?
So it comes under mitigation, sir?
No. Prevention, yeah, preparedness is mitigation, right? Prevention is different. So PMRR is prevention, mitigation, response, and recovery. So preparedness is a kind of mitigation only. Prevention is completely different because you are trying to prevent the disaster, for which you are taking much more proactive steps right from planning the development of that area. So basically preparedness is you are anticipating a disaster and preparing yourself. Response is how you are trying to respond during the disaster. So disaster has struck, you have no time, so how you are responding. And then recovery or rehabilitation is the post-disaster thing, what you are doing. So these are the 4 stages. If possible, you have to prevent the disaster. For preventing the disaster, what you are doing, you have to ensure that the zonation mapping, when you're, for example, I'm taking earthquakes. If you know that place is earthquake prone, how are you able to construct tall towers or trying to unnecessarily threaten the lives? Okay, so these are the 4 stages.
Clear, sir. Thank you.
Anything else? Fine. So your next class may be on the Wednesday. Okay, tomorrow there may not be any class. Okay, so just prepare and keep writing. Okay, we'll again meet on Wednesday. Okay, good night.